Well, welcome to our Friday Features video. I have with me, to my far right, Elena Sproul, a former employee here of Tepeyac, and a mother of Evelyn, who's four and a half now, and Dr. Dan Fisk here, who's on his 16th year at Tepeyac. And our subject this month is love, marriage, and chastity. And you might think, well, what do those things have to do with Divine Mercy Care and life-affirming medicine that happens at Tepeyac? Well, we're going to take a deeper dive into that and really discover that there's a real strong correlation between a healthy individual and their healthy marriage and what it takes to kind of really personify that and really get through different hurdles that all of us encounter from time to time in our marriage. But having a healthy marriage, having a healthy relationship at home, and what does that do to your overall health? So, welcome you both. I'm really excited to have both of you here. This has been a really nice way for us to kind of tackle a lot of different issues and topics throughout life-affirming medicine that's practiced here at Tepeyac and that we really try to promote and engage in at Divine Mercy Care. And so welcome both of you.
Thank you.
So tell me, Elena, it's been about 5 years since you were here last. So tell us a little bit about your interaction prior, and then how, in some of the different what the last 5 years has brought for you.
Before I worked at Tepeyac, my husband and I had been trying to get pregnant, and one of my friends let me know about Tepeyac, and so I thought, okay, well, I might as well, get some things sorted out in my medical life, and but as I went to the appointments and realized that it was something, more than just physical needs, that the doctors were very caring and very compassionate to, my plight.
Mm-hmm.
I was not able to conceive. My husband and I had tried for several years, and we just had tried everything under the sun, and that our faith allows us to, and we were going through the process of, should we adopt? Should we, what should we do? Should we just, stay a solo couple and just, minister to the youth that we had been working with
Mm-hmm.
In other venues? And we went to an adoption meeting. And this was actually while I was working at Tepeyac. I actually started employment with them, just working in the front office, answering phones and making appointments, check in, check out. And but this whole time we were still, struggling and offering up, what we were unable to provide for ourselves that we were, helping others with. And so it was a challenge, but just the fact that we were able to pray through it and be there for one another, it was really strengthening.
Mm-hmm.
So we had thought about adoption, but didn't really feel right, like the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up getting an email. My husband received an email after November 1st. We had went to Mass, and so the next day, our friend who saw us there sent Dan an email, and he said, I know you guys have been trying to, start a family for a while. Would you be interested in adopting?
Mm-hmm.
One of his neighbor's daughters was looking to find a family for her daughter that
Mm-hmm.
she was going to give birth to. And my husband made a few emails, happen before he called me just to see if it was even physically possible to adopt in that short span of time, because Evelyn was due at the end of December. And so we ended up, he called me and he said, what do you think? What do you think about this? And all of a sudden I just got this overwhelming sense that Our Lady was with us, and just recalling her fiat and her yes to God.
Mm-hmm.
And So I said yes, and immediately after that, I just felt this overwhelming flood of reassurance and of peace, and it was absolutely amazing. So we went through the whole process rather quickly, but it never seemed like it was too much for us. It was just really what was the next step and what was the next step. But we had about 10 days between the time that we were chosen as the adoptive parents to the day that Evelyn was born. She was 3 weeks early. So it was quite a shock, but I mean, not unanticipated. But we've been cherishing every moment with her since. And we are just so thankful to God and to our birth mother. And it's just so beautiful to be a part of that, of God's divine plan.
No, it's a great story for sure. And I think on a lot of levels, I think one of the things that you touched on, that those families and those women who are really trying to get pregnant, it can be a very, very difficult time. There's a lot of stress on the marriage itself. And you mentioned earlier that in a conversation we had off the camera about the distance that you and your husband physical because of his occupation. And I just think that every marriage has its difficulties. There's different challenges throughout, and I think it's important it's wonderful when you have faith to help bolster that. It really can be, in my opinion, it's really the glue that helps keep you together as a couple. Doctor, when you 16 years here practicing medicine, a little different than maybe where you were before, but tell us a little bit how you've seen, love, marriage, and chastity within the practice both be, something that's, when it's not there, it manifests itself in things that might not be healthy, or I really should be more open-ended to you. How does that manifest itself? When that love, marriage, and chastity is wounded or it's not there, how does that manifest itself in patients?
Well, when it's not there, there can be some serious fallout to that. Many times it manifests itself as psycho-emotional disturbance, anxiety, depression, much more prevalent when it is not there. And that goes outside of marriage, before marriage. Many people come in feeling pretty wounded, that what they're really searching for is love within a relationship, and in a way that does not sexualize them, and is not using them, but it's really love for who they are. It's the righteous and godly love that they really crave, and when it's not present, so many times people are looking for other avenues of approach for that. And many times that can have a real deleterious effect on them from a psychological and emotional standpoint, but it can also have physical complications to it as well, especially if there are poor choices that are made, particularly for sexual activity outside of marriage. And a multitude of sexual partners. Sexually transmissible infections are very common. Unintended pregnancies are very prevalent in that group as well. And then the moral problems of dealing with unintended pregnancies and perhaps some choices to terminate the pregnancies that do exist, and the fallout that comes from that. So many times it can have a ripple effect. And it's an unfortunate cascade of events that happens. On the flip side, for many people who are in very healthy and happy marriages, it is by no means guaranteed that person will be, in fact, healthy and not have any kind of major medical issues or diseases or problems or what have you. Far from it. Many people do have things that are going on that are really no fault of their own, or just the consequences of the inexorable march of time that it takes on all of us. But they're much more able to adjust to, potentially chronic diseases and conditions. And they're more able to follow through on treatment plans and typically are better able to cope with some of the longer term issues if they're in a stable, faithful,
supportive environment,
and loving marriage and family.
Yeah. No, so true. I think like we said at the outset, I think every marriage, every couple ends up having some sort of a curveball. You know, there's how big they are and how difficult they are to handle. It remains to be seen, and it's interesting. You talk about love and really some of the promiscuity and how that can manifest itself from a health and psychological standpoint. But I think on a younger self, myself, what did I think love was when I was in my 20s, and what do I really know what it is in my 40s, and being married for 20 years. And to me, it boils down to sacrifice. It really, like a good, healthy marriage, and what love really is. Whether we're loving our children, whether we're loving our spouses, it's sacrificing for them, right? It's and that manifests itself in a variety of ways. With love, marriage, and chastity, it's being chaste for your spouse in so many different ways, and not just faithfulness, but the right time in the moment to really engage in relations with your spouse that both mutually and respectfully. And I think that sometimes we also often don't always talk about, but it's part of that healthy relationship. And I think it's important to kind of to take note of that. And I think when those aren't healthy, when that relationship isn't healthy, there's a lot of, and you alluded to it, Doctor, the lack of good mental stability or good mental health that is foregone from that. So tell me a little bit more, Elena. What in your experience? So how many years have you been married now?
It'll be 14.
14 years. Awesome. Yeah. Congratulations. I think it is. In this day and age, we don't always see long marriages. And how about yourself, Dr. Fisk?
My wife and I have been married 32 years next month.
Awesome. So you're leading the charge here. This is great. But I also think it's something that you probably will both agree. Do you have to work at it every day?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what does that look like, working at it every day in your marriage?
So it just means for me, essentially, seeing my spouse, seeing my husband as Christ, or as Christ sees his church. Just that complete self-giving love, that, dying to myself, whether it be something like a remark I would want to salvo back with, or just, being not speaking in a harsh tone, even, because my husband and I, as with any marriage, you have, difficulties or, something that comes up, and you both try to compromise to work it out and to come to some arrangement, whether it be, transportation or dinner plans or,
right. Everyday life, right?
Exactly. So just treating the other person with the dignity that God gave them, and seeing them as a child of God, and that gift of a spouse is priceless, and it's a vocation, it's a call, and there are so many more things, but just being able to step out of what I want, not being selfish, and trying to see the good, and to always, say things in love, out of love. It's a daily chore.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's one that I try to take on with happiness.
It's funny when you say work. I just remember too, as a younger person, thinking like, well, work. And so I used to ask my father, and they've been married for 56 years now, and And I asked them, how did you have, because I never remember seeing my parents argue. I'm like, well, that's amazing. And my aunt would say, well, to some extent, they've done a disservice for you because that's not the reality of life. Married families argue so from time to time. But I would ask my father, Dad, how does that work? How did you guys do this? He goes, well, I'm very, very lucky, and we had to work at it. And again, me in my 20s thinking, work. My outlook on work was different. As you get older and we get wiser, hopefully, that we realize that work is something good. We're trying to build something. We're trying to make something better in our daily work life. You can see that. But the same thing happens in our marriage, right? We're actually working on it to whether that's to raise the children in a way that's to know, love, and serve God, or whatever your ultimate goals are as a couple. I think about, that's what that kind of brings to mind. One thing, Doctor, I do think, we have this as a tagline for Tepeyac. It's something more than medicine. And I've seen it because my wife and I have had children through the practice and seen you in action for sure. But tell me, how does that work in its day-to-day? Like, whether it be this week or last week or a year ago, tell me how you see it, something more than medicine, and how does it affect in this topic, love and marriage and chastity?
Well, I would say that it manifests itself in ways, in a multitude of ways, actually. Starting with just respect for what it is that God's created, starting with the bedrock, marriage and family, and the Bible tells us to honor marriage. It says so very explicitly and plainly, and to honor the marriage bed, and to be faithful to one another, because it is a portrait, as Elena said, of Christ and His church. We are reflecting that, and human procreation is something that God has created to illustrate the two becoming one flesh. And right in front of you, there's evidence that actually has happened. And fortunately, that happened to my wife and I 3 times. We have 3 sons that are now soon to be 31, 27, and soon to be 26. It's something that has played out in my own life, but I see it every day in how we try to honor marriage and family, and to help people understand the sanctity of what God has created in their lives and how beneficial it can be for them. We also spend many time that otherwise would be just for annual checkup purposes. For instance, talking to people about how is life going for you and in your marriage and in your family, and what's happened. Even this morning, I had a couple of conversations like that of stresses and strains or different issues that are going on within marriage with some of our patients. And we can have a godly and spiritual conversation about that, and I can encourage them and pray with them, and we can talk about it from a godly standpoint. And we don't hesitate to open up Scripture with people too, to help people to understand that it all gets back to try to honoring God with what it is that we're doing here, and with their in their lives, how they can do that in their marriage and their family. And in the meantime, we're trying to help them take care of themselves properly as well, to take proper care of the temple that God tells us our bodies are.
No, that's a really great point. I think I think back of the articles that we have shared in the Friday features of this month of August, and the different points of chastity, and what does that mean from we know what it means for outside of a marriage, but even inside of the marriage, what it really means, and that is, and Elena, you had touched on it before. Sometimes, not necessarily were you maybe talking about chastity, but you were just talking about saying no to self at some point. And I think that's, I think it's an important point for the husbands, for both spouses really, but for the husbands to be able to be cognizant of that within the relationship of the marriage, and to say no to self, and to be prepared to, but that in offering that sacrifice to to the union, that it is you are listening to what your spouse is going through, and that maybe tonight isn't the right night. And I just think sometimes that's important to address and important to really be cognizant of that. I think there's certainly some teachings. I just think about the readings from this weekend in Mass, and thinking like, it's really interesting that the timing of how things go, and the readings that are chosen, and they're very apropos at times. And I think this past weekend's just talking about husbands respecting your wives, your spouses, and really understanding. And I think sometimes we don't always know, what do you mean, how does that take place? I respect her. I come home, I give her a kiss, I say thank you, she makes a meal, this is wonderful, I'm playing with the kids. But there's something more to that in the intimacy of the house. Elena, tell me a little bit more about what when you think of, if you've read some of these articles that we've been producing, what are some of your first reflections on them, and how did maybe they speak to you, or to speak to friends that you know?
Well, when I read them, I absolutely loved them. It just reminded me of all of the reasons why I wake up in the morning and I choose what I wear, or I, choose how to go about my day, the things that I do, the things that I say. If, for example, if there's somebody jogging down the street and like the guy has his shirt off, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a guy, he's running, that's fine, and then I move on. But just not allowing myself to dwell on it, or that sort of thing. It's trying to be, as pure as I can be with God in my marriage, for my husband, for the glory of God. Just being able to read the articles, it was enlightening, and I just recalled different times in my life when I was like, yeah, that actually did help. If I just reached out to God and said, hey, I'm having trouble with this, like what I'm going to wear today. Can you please help me figure out what I'm going to wear today that will glorify you in the way that I look, or just what I say, and or how I bring up my daughter, and or how I speak to my husband. So a lot of charity goes into chastity in marriage, and so you have to look at your spouse and say, has he been, doing heavy lifting over the weekend and he's just exhausted and he just took 4 ibuprofen. It's like, you know what? Let's just relax. Let's, kick back and, either watch some TV or, read a book, that kind of thing. That's fine. Because, if the tables were turned and I was exhausted or emotional, I know my husband would, say the same thing. He's like, you know what? You're having a pretty rough day. Let's just go ahead and, relax. And it's not all about marital intimacy. And actually, playing a board game, or, just sitting and being in the same room and conversing can actually be more intimate at times.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I say from time and time again to my own wife, is just our conversations about whether it be current events or life issues or things that we're tackling and raising our children. Those times are really what are, it just feels like it's the solidification of our marriage. It really does make me feel good, for sure, that I've got someone that I'm continuing to build this relationship with, and we're both shooting towards for our children to know, love, and serve God, and really as that is our primary goal. And so it's what you're saying is really hitting home. It's good. Dr. Fisk, tell me a little bit more. How I think when I think of some of our patients, and I think of the stories, they're not always rosy. Some of them are very, very difficult, and and I just think that sometimes it's unfortunate because I think maybe it's either been some of the choices or some of the lack thereof choices maybe that have been put in front of the patients at Tepeyac, or at least those that are in need of your services and your help and your understanding, maybe more challenging than others. And I guess what I'm asking is, I think trying to help our patients at Tepeyac to find a better love, a better marriage, and a better form of understanding the benefits of chastity. Do you ever engage in conversations with, you're OBGYN, so you're mostly 99.9% of the time dealing with women. Is there ever an opportunity where you're actually speaking with the husband or the male in the relationship?
Yeah, sometimes. For most pregnancies, that is the case.
Yeah.
Many, although not all, pregnancies where the father of the baby is involved, whether they're married or not, we have ample opportunity to interact with them, and many of them are very engaged in the process. And then sometimes for other routine kind of appointments, then they'll be present, not always. That's less common. But sometimes when the wife is experiencing some kind of medical problem, be it abnormal bleeding, pelvic pain, any number of different things, the husband will be there. Partially to try to understand and help his wife understand what it is that the doc said as another memory aid and jog. But also to give his perspective. Some will just sit there and take it all in. But many times we do have an opportunity to interact with men. And it's sometimes very satisfying to be able to do that because in a good marriage, it's the two of them are one.
Right.
And for those that are struggling more, well, it's all that much more reason why it's important for them to be that way and to encourage a greater degree of intimacy in their ability to communicate with one another and their ability to empathize with one another.
No, it's good to hear you say that. I think from time to time, the men or the husbands or whatever kind of think, well, it's her body. What can I do here? But to hear you speak like that just now, it's an affirmation for myself to be engaged in that process, because you're right. Because the three, the two of us are one, and with God in the picture as well. But just to have that understanding that, yes, it's important for the woman to understand her body and what she's going through, but because of the nature of things, it's important for the spouse to really understand it as well.
Absolutely.
And I think and the spouse can aid in the more that the spouse understands, the more he can help aid in hopefully the embetterment or the long-term health of
and
her
that
health.
also goes for natural family planning too. That's a classic example of where it's extremely important for the husband to be tracking. But I think it's also important in the setting of pregnancy, and also in the setting where there's potentially more serious gynecologic kind of problems going on. For routine health maintenance and screening, it's probably less necessary, but still, they can be advocates for their wives, and they can be actively engaged in decision-making mutually with everybody concerned, because it will involve them eventually.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and really a great point to end on. I think just understanding that it's in the marriage, like any good marriage, you're both making the decisions together, and through whatever knowledge that you need, whether it's how you raise your kids or how you engage in curing an ailment, working with the docs, obviously, but. Just want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank you two for coming on today, and I really appreciate it. It's been a good conversation, and I really encourage everyone out there to really like and share this, and join us. Be sure to join us next month for another. You had mentioned NFP. I think next month is going to be that's going to be our theme. It's going to be on NFP, so we'll have a couple of new guests for us, and I think Dr. Safekovic is going to be joining us. So,
Good choice.
But we're excited to have that as our subject for next month. Thank you very much.